Hi guys, in this episode of Shri series, we're going to be talking about linear equations, but to be more specific, calculating the distance or the length between 2 points. All right. Now, if you look at the previous videos, you guys learned how to calculate the gradient. We also learned how to calculate the equation of a straight line. We also talked about calculating the midpoint, all right, between two pairs of coordinates. So in today's video, we're going to move a little bit further and talk about calculating the distance. All right. So what do we mean by distance? So suppose, for instance, let me just draw a sketch here, and we got a graph. Suppose that's A and that's B. All right. And A has the coordinates x1, y1, just like any other generic point, and B has the coordinates x2, y2. All right. So the formula for calculating the distance between the two, in other words, we're trying to find out when you measure that, when you want to find the length, what is the formula to work out the distance? All right. So the formula for working out the distance between 2 points is simply writing it down here. So I would say D equals x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, and you find the square root. All right, so that's literally what you need to do. So you get x2, subtract x1 squared, y2 minus y1 squared, add them together, and eventually find the square root. All right, that's exactly what we need to do when we are finding the distance between 2 points. All right, so x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, and then the answer you get, you find the square root. All right, so let's look at A. I'm going to repeat the points. A is 0, 4 and 2, 9. All right, so these are the points. So what we can do is we can say let that be A and let that be B. You could use C, D or XY, whichever letter that you're comfortable with. All right, the next thing we need to do is to allocate the respective coordinates. So if that is x1, we'll make that y1, and if that is x2, we'll make that y2. I like to encourage students to develop the habit of pointing the exact coordinates, so in that way it becomes easy, just like how we worked out with gradients and how we worked out with midpoints. So we allocate x1, y1, x2 and y2. All right, and like I said before, you can even make that x1 or y1 or x2 and y2, it doesn't matter, but you got to pair them appropriately. All right, the next thing is we need to find the distance. So the formula for the distance is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, and then we find the square root. So D equals that. All right, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, add them up and find the square root. All right, so what is x2? 2 minus 0 squared. And what is y2? 9 minus 4 squared. That's what we do. All right, and then 2 minus 0 becomes 2 squared, and 9 minus 4 is 5 squared, and that's 4 plus 25, and the answer is the square root of 29. All right, now if this requires you to solve, if this is a question that doesn't require you to solve without the use of a calculator, and then all you simply need to do is leave it like that. All right, now we know very well the square root of 29. 29 is not a perfect square. 25 is a perfect square, so we could say it's somewhere between 5 to 6. So the answer I would approximate is somewhere between 5 to 6. All right, so that would be the distance here. Okay, now let's look at B. All right, now if you look at B here, we've got -3, 8 and 1, 1. So what do I do there? I'll put that as x1, y1, x2, y2. Write down the formula: x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, and then we find the square root. All right, so 1 minus minus 3. So please be careful with the sign. I've put 1 minus and a minus 3. That minus 3 is from here, all right? So please be wary of the sign changes that you might come across. And what's y2? 1 minus 8. And that's going to be squared, and then you find the square root. All right, 1 minus minus 3 becomes 4 squared, and 1 minus 7 is negative 7 squared. All right, so when we add them, that becomes 16 plus 49, and that's going to be the square root of 65. Like I said, I don't have the calculator with me. But if this is a non-calculator section, you just leave the answer like that. If you have a calculator with you, just punch in the square root of 65 and you get the answer. All right. Let's look at C. My apologies for writing it jumbled up, as long as you understand the formula, and I will be putting more questions to enhance your understanding. All right. So x1, y1, x2, y2. Write my formula, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, square root, x2, negative 4 minus negative 10, that's a square, plus 10 minus 11 square, and put the square root there. All right, negative 4. All right, let me just zoom this here for you guys. So in that way you guys can see here. So please bear with the zoom. All right, you can see that carefully. Just lift that up there for you. All right, so what I've done is I've put negative 4 minus negative 10 plus 10 minus 11. So negative 4 minus negative 10 is positive 6. So that becomes 6 squared plus negative 1 squared. All right, so that's now going to be 36 plus 1, and the answer is going to be the square root of 37. All right, that's the answer there. So what we've done is negative 4 minus minus 10. Like I said, be very mindful of the sign. That's going to be positive 6. And 10 minus 11 is negative 1 squared, and then you find the square root. All right, so let me just summarize this here for you. All right, so I'll just zoom a little bit down so we get the big picture. The first thing you need to remember when you're calculating the length between 2 points is allocate x1, y1, x2 and y2, just like how we do gradients and midpoint. The next step is to write down the formula for the length. So that's x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And the steps from here onwards is merely substituting, and then you're finding the square, and then you find the square root. One of the tricks or should I say the mistakes a lot of students make is they get this bit right. They write the formula, they substitute well, they add the squares, but unfortunately forget to find the square root. Always remember, the final step in calculating your distance is to find the square root, just like Pythagorean theorem. All right, so likewise in this question again, what do? We did exactly the same. Allocate x1, y1, x2, y2, write down the formula, and then substitute them, square them, and then find the square root. And obviously this is the formula to find the distance, and I've written it again. All right, and if you notice, in all the 3 questions that I've shown you, I've been consistent with writing the formula and showing my working. It's always good practice in maths to write the formula and show your working thoroughly, because you get marks for showing your working. If you got the answer wrong, but you showed sound strategies towards your methodology and your working, you will get consolation marks. All right. Another part I wanted to mention here is be very careful with your negative numbers, especially here. I purposely put a negative number just to show you the impact that negative numbers can have in this question. So we did 1 minus minus 3, but bearing in mind when you got 2 negative numbers, that becomes a positive. So it's very important to be wary about that. If you go to C as well, if I zoom a little bit, you'll actually notice that there's also a negative there, and that becomes a positive. All right. However, the beauty about solving distance questions is whether you've got a negative or a positive number, when you square it, you're going to get a positive number. All right. So I'll give you an example. All right. I'll write it down here so you guys can see what I mean. If you got 5 squared, all right, so 5 squared is 5 times 5, and that becomes 25. Are we going to get the same result if we use negative 5 squared and not 5 squared? You will get, because negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. So the beauty about these sort of questions is when you get a negative number and you're finding the square, you will eventually get a positive number. Just like 5 squared and negative 5 squared, both in brackets will yield the same answer. All right. So that's really what finding the distance between 2 points talks about. Like I said, write the formula, make sure that you square, and then finally find the square root. And you can see here, you should know how to square, you should know how to find square roots, and also know your integers of positive and negative numbers. If you don't know any of the 3 mentioned points, this question will be absolutely hard for you to solve. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye now.